My name is Mia Miller, 28 years old, a sergeant in the U.S. Army. After 8 long years of service, missing 7 Christmases with my family, I counted down the days and prepared myself mentally for my return. I was filled with hope, thinking that this would be an opportunity to heal old wounds so that my family could celebrate a warm Christmas together like before. But I was wrong. It was late December afternoon when I received my first text message from my father in years. I was sitting on the bed in our small room on base, tapping away at the phone screen with the wrapped gifts for my mother, brother, and sister. Each little gift was a token of my care for them, something I hoped would help ease the pain in our family. Then a text message popped up from a familiar number, my father. It was the first contact from him in 8 years. "Don't come home," the message simply said. Never in my life had my heart been so broken. My eyes were blurred with tears that I couldn't stop. How could he say that to me? After all these years of service and sacrifice, all I wanted was to go home, to see my family again. But this sentence. It seemed like time stopped, and in my head, there was only one question. Why? I sat still, my hands shaking as I opened the message again. "Don't come home." How could I accept this? After a moment of silence, I typed a simple message back. "Okay." The whole room suddenly became empty. Even the gifts I had prepared became meaningless in my eyes. Although his message might not have had any effect on others, to me, it was like a punch in the face. For the first time, I felt like I was no longer a part of my family. I felt an indescribable sense of anger and disappointment. But I decided not to let it overwhelm me. I stood up, regained my composure, packed my gifts into my backpack, and wondered what to do next. 3 days later, I woke up in the middle of a cold morning. All night long, I listened to the gentle snowfall outside my window. After a long night without any sleep, I couldn't stop thinking about my family and why my father was acting like this. I tried to call my mother, but I didn't. I was afraid that if I called, I wouldn't be able to calm down again. When my phone rang, I thought it might be my mother calling back, but it didn't. A series of missed calls from my family, then a call from their lawyer. Realizing that this situation could be serious, I quickly turned on my phone. The first words from my mother in 3 years were just a few short words. "We can't take you in. Your father doesn't want you back." My heart broke, not only because of my father's refusal, but also because of my mother's heavy silence. I sighed, not wanting to continue talking on the phone anymore. They had made their decision, and there was nothing I could do but accept the truth. I stood up, walked out of the room, and headed straight to my training room. The feeling of helplessness and fatigue weighed heavily on my shoulders. But I know, life is not always as easy as I hoped. Soon I decided that I would still go home, but not back to the Millers. I would find my own space, a place to face the past and face myself. I quietly packed my things, prepared to leave, and never looked back at that empty room again. Now, I was no longer just the daughter of the family. I was Mia Miller, a woman who decided to decide her own fate, no matter how cruel it was. As I prepared to leave the base, I couldn't stop thinking about the message from my father. Was he trying to push me away? Or had I really done something wrong that made him not want me back? As I boarded the plane, a chill washed over me. Every sound of the engine made me feel lost, like I didn't belong anywhere. The entire flight was filled with heavy silence. As the plane began its descent into Bentonville, memories of home came flooding back like a tidal wave. Christmases passed, the twinkling lights on the tree, all seemed like a distant dream now. The plane landed, and I began to walk out. I felt a mixture of freedom and pain. I realized that I could no longer live in the shadow of my family. My father's rejection taught me an important lesson. Family is not the only place where you can find peace. Sometimes, family is what you have to fight through. I stepped outside, looking at the gray, cloudy sky. Another Christmas had come, But I had no more expectations. This Christmas, I would find peace in my own way. I always thought I was the only one who felt like I didn't belong in the family. The Miller family has always been a model of perfection, at least on the outside. My father was a successful businessman who always had everything within reach. My mother, a gentle and caring woman, sacrificed a lot to maintain stability in the family. My brother James was a successor who was carefully groomed since childhood, and my younger sister, Olivia, always received praise for his outstanding academic achievements. But I, Mia, felt like he was always left out, never receiving the same expectations as his brothers in the family. I was born in an old house in Bentonville, Arkansas, where everything was always neat and perfect. From my father's fancy cars to the lavish holiday parties my mother threw, my family had it all: fame, wealth, and respect from the community. But for me, it was a gilded cage, a place where I couldn't live my life. Whenever I tried to show a little of my individuality, my father would discourage me. He always had his own plans for me, and all I did was please him. My father, Richard Miller, always considered the family business as the most important thing. He is the founder of Miller Construction, one of the leading construction companies in the area. He never allowed anyone in his family to have their own choice about the future, especially me. Since I was little, he planned for me to join the family business, inherit everything he had built. But I did not have the same passion for the job as he did. I wanted to have my own life. Olivia, my sister, was the one who always did everything as my father wanted. She was the daughter who was expected to inherit all the academic achievements, and my father always paid special attention to her. But with me, things were always different. I was not as good at studying as Olivia, and I was not as interested in business as my brother James. But I had a passion of my own, which my father never understood: Army. When I was in high school, I joined ROTC, Army Reserve Cadets, and I fell in love with the organization, discipline, and camaraderie that the military provided right away. I decided to join the military instead of the business school my father had planned for me. When I announced my decision, my father nearly went crazy. He roared, his eyes bloodshot with rage. "No daughter of mine will waste her life taking orders and getting shot," he said, his face full of rage. "You'll regret it." I remember his words clearly, as if they were echoing in my head every day. My mother, Clara, was always the peacemaker in the family. She always took my side, but her fear of my father left her unable to do anything more than beg him to change his mind. But my decision was made. I told my father firmly, "I am joining the army, and I do not regret this decision." My father looked at me coldly, and I felt his words like a heavy stone pressing down on my heart. "Then you have no place in this house," he said without mercy. I heard my mother gasp, and I saw Travis, my brother, turn away from me, unable to look directly at me. Olivia, my sister, sobbed. No one in my family supported my decision, except my grandmother Eleanor, who always defends me. After that argument, I decided to leave. I left Bentonville and my family with nothing but the hope that I would find a different life, one that I could choose for myself. I joined the army and began basic training. Mia, a young woman no longer the daughter of the Miller family, stepped into a new world, one with no expectations, no judgmental looks. It was the first time in my life that I felt free, even though the military training was so difficult that I almost couldn't bear it. The early mornings, the harsh training sessions, and the strenuous physical training tested my body to the point where I thought I couldn't continue. But I got through it, bit by bit. That's when I met Cassie, my best friend and teammate throughout my training. Cassie was the only person who didn't judge me by the name Miller, by my family's expectations. She was the one who always understood me, and was always there to support me when I was in trouble. I found a sister, a friend in Cassie, someone I could lean on when I needed it. My first business trip was to Afghanistan, where things got more serious than ever. The heat, the bloody battles, the danger and the homesickness gripped me every day. But I realized that I was good at this job. The Army didn't care who I was or where I came from. They only cared about what I could do and how I could protect my comrades. And I did. When my unit was ambushed during an attack, I didn't think, I just acted. At that time, I led the counterattack and saved 12 people, including 2 children. This action was recognized, and I received silver medal. My mother called me, crying with pride. But when I sent the card home, I didn't get a congratulatory message from my father. All I got was silence. As the years passed, I continued to serve and continued to join the wars. Every time I received a medal or a certificate of commendation, I only felt more alone. My contact with my family became less and less frequent, and I began to understand that no matter how much I achieved, I would never find acceptance from my family. And then one day, as I was getting ready to return to Bentonville, I got a text from my dad. "Don't come home." That Christmas, I returned. This return was not because I wanted to, but because of a difficult decision that I could not avoid. Despite the rejection, I decided to return to Bentonville, not to see my parents or seek forgiveness, but to face what I had left behind. When I got the notice to leave, part of me didn't want to go home. But then I thought about my grandmother, Eleanor, and all she did to make it possible for me to leave without being stopped. She was the only one who supported me when I chose the military path. She was the only one who didn't judge me by my name, Miller, and my father's expectations. I know she would be happy to have me back, no matter how things have changed. Bentonville hadn't changed much since I'd left. The small town was still the same, with its quiet streets and familiar shops. But for me, everything was different. This return no longer felt like a daughter coming home. It felt like a return from a war not just with an outside enemy, but with the people I loved most. The plane landed in Bentonville in an eerie silence. I wondered if I had made a mistake in coming back. How could I stand in that house, among people I had always felt I didn't belong to, while they continued to live their lives as if I weren't there? Neither my luggage nor the gifts I had brought with me had any significance. They were no longer a link between me and my family. They were just objects of expectation, presents presented as a way to atone, but not a real connection. I sighed as I stepped off the plane, trying not to think about what had happened. Family background. Bentonville was never a comfortable place for me. My home was not a place where I could find freedom, but a gilded cage where I always felt imprisoned. Richard, my father, never gave me the chance to try anything other than the family business. My mother, Clara, always smoothed things over, always taking my father's side without ever having a chance to side with me. James, my brother, is always the first choice for all decisions, and Olivia, my sister, has always been the standard daughter of the family. And me? I'm just the extra one. But all I wanted was freedom. I didn't want to live according to my father's plan. I didn't want to be an heir. I wanted to make my own way, whether it was in the military or something else. And I did. However, this return is not to find myself again. It is to face the truth, a truth that I have gradually realized over the years. No matter how much I try to distance myself, my family is still something that cannot be denied, whether I want it or not. I cannot deny that a part of me still hopes for reconciliation. When I got home, I didn't go straight to my family's house, but decided to go to a small house that I had rented nearby. It wasn't big, not luxurious, but there was a strange quietness. There was only me and the things in this house. There were no twinkling lights from the Christmas trees, no lovely gifts, no family joy, just me, alone with my heavy thoughts. The next day, I decided to go to Coastal Coffee, the old coffee shop that Olivia used to frequent when I was in high school. I never expected to see her there. Olivia sat across from me, her eyes worried. She looked at me with an indescribable expression. There was a fear in her eyes that I couldn't understand. She sat still, her hands rummaging through the items in her bag, as if she didn't know what to say. "Amber," she said, her voice shaking. "You're really here, in the flesh." She looked at me, her eyes full of emotion. I just looked at her for a long time, then asked, "Are you okay?" She hesitated, then nodded, but I could see she was not okay. She kept looking around, avoiding my eyes. "It doesn't seem like you think," she said softly. "My father has changed. Everything has changed." My eyes widened as I realized that my family was no longer the family I remembered. Olivia began to talk about the changes in the family. My father had changed not only in the way he treated me, but also in the way he treated the company and everyone around him. Everything was falling apart. "He's working with partners who could ruin everything," Olivia continued, her voice full of concern. "Travis has made serious mistakes with his investments. Mom doesn't get out as much as she used to. And he started threatening people." The name Travis startled me. My brother was always the one expected to take over the family business, but now he was ruining everything. Everything I had hoped would go well was crumbling, like a sandcastle being swallowed by the waves. "Why are you telling me all this?" I asked, unable to hide my confusion. "Why is my father acting like this?" Olivia looked down at the table, unable to face me anymore. "You can't change that, Amber. He's my father, and there's nothing I can do but accept it." That was when I realized that this family had changed, and I had changed too. They were no longer the people I expected to protect me, but now the people I needed to fight to free myself. After meeting Olivia, I felt exhausted and depressed. All I knew was that my family was in chaos, and there was nothing I could do to fix it. They were blaming each other, and I didn't know if I could ever be a part of this family again. Once again, I saw the family's luxury cars parked outside the window. Richard Miller, my father, was not only a successful businessman, but also a powerful person in the community. But now, he is losing everything. His bad decisions have led the family into an abyss that I cannot pull them out of. The next day, I met Ryan, an old friend of mine who also works as a repairman in the apartment complex I rent. Over hot chocolate, he told me some of the gossip in town. "It's not what you think," Ryan said, his eyes full of concern. "Your father is doing everything he can to cover up his mistakes." Ryan's words made me even more afraid. It seemed like I was standing in a bottomless sea, where my family was slowly sinking and no one could save them. With each passing day, I felt more and more like an outsider in my own family. What I thought would be a return to heal, to mend old wounds, turned out to only make me feel more alone and lost. The days living in Bentonville, even though it was in a small rented house, was like a turning point in my life. Everything before had always been a perfect picture, but now the truth began to gradually reveal itself through the gaps that could not be hidden. Even though I had gotten used to my father's silence and coldness, things seemed to be coming to a head. Meanwhile, Olivia and Travis, like all the children protected in my father's shadow, felt like a lost piece. My family had become an entity I no longer recognized, like a house built from layers of shells with no warmth inside. Every time I saw them, I could only see more obvious cracks in our relationship. Both my father and mother no longer seemed like the people I once loved. We no longer shared small stories of life. Everything passed in silence, as if we were no longer a family. My mother, who I once thought would be my only support, was now like a ghost, always choosing to remain silent and accept my father's every decision. That made me even more disappointed. During the meetings, I noticed one thing very clearly. He was losing his way. He continued to work for the family company, but every decision he made seemed uncertain. There was no confidence in the way he spoke, and his eyes seemed to avoid all important issues. I saw him shrug his shoulders when talking about the company situation and the mistakes my father had made. That made me feel that things were getting out of control for the family. In the following days, I learned more and more about the changes in the company and family. The story of Miller Construction was no longer the success story he once was. My father's partners, who had previously praised him, were now being removed from important projects. The contracts he signed, the financial decisions he made, all bore the hallmarks of greed and deceit. This was confirmed when I overheard a conversation between Olivia and one of the company's employees. That conversation opened a new door in my mind. Olivia, despite her seemingly calm exterior and always being the academic star of the family, was under immense pressure from my father. She seemed unable to stand up and speak the truth. Olivia had given up her dreams to continue pleasing my father, but I began to realize that everything she had believed in had now become a lie that we had to live with. I felt like a stranger in my own family. Although I tried to face the explanations, face the harsh truth, no one in this family really wanted to face the problems they were facing. Even when I asked about Travis's bad decisions, he just shook his head and said everything would be fine, that he just had to do what my father told him. One morning, as I was cleaning my house and packing up the gifts I had yet to send out, a call came from Ryan, my old friend and neighborhood appliance repairman, stopped me. Ryan had been a big help when I got back to Bentonville and had given me warnings about my family's situation. He called me to a little coffee shop on the west side of town where we could talk without anyone knowing. When I arrived, Ryan was sitting there, his eyes full of concern. "Mia, I can't keep this to myself any longer," he began, his voice low and serious. "Your father is doing something bigger than you think." "What?" I asked, my heart starting to beat faster. "The government contracts your father was signing. They weren't just normal construction projects. He was signing large military contracts, projects that the company couldn't afford," Ryan said, his tone growing more serious. "But the worst part is that he used political connections to get these contracts, and there are people investigating the payments he took." It was like a bolt from the blue. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The company my father had built from the ground up, the company I had once proudly called ours, was now caught up in a massive conspiracy. I didn't know what to do with this information, but I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't stand by and watch. Everything was too complicated. Not only was I facing the collapse of my family, but now I was facing the collapse of my company, and possibly my father as well. And yet, part of me still couldn't accept what I had just heard. I had wanted to find my family, but now it seemed too far away, too broken, too irreparable. While I was thinking about everything, I got a call from Eleanor. She knew everything and called me in to discuss the next steps. "Mia," she said, her voice firm, "you have to face the truth. This family has gone too far, and you can't save them if they don't want to save themselves." I felt a sense of relief when I heard her words. She was always someone I could turn to for guidance. But this time, I wasn't sure what I could do to salvage the situation. Maybe I was facing a truth I didn't want to accept. Should I continue to stand by my family, or was it time for me to leave everything behind and find myself? In the end, I decided to do what I knew was right, even if it meant facing opposition, proving that I was no longer the miller's daughter. I would stand up and find my way. This story is not just about my family, but also about my realization that sometimes, in order to move forward, you have to leave behind things that no longer serve you. When I decided to leave Bentonville, part of me felt relieved, as if a burden had been lifted for too long. But another part of me felt scared, not only because of the loneliness I was facing, but also because I was truly at a crossroads in my life. Was I really ready to leave it all behind, these complicated and painful relationships, to find myself again? Or would I continue to fight to save a family that was too broken? Over the next few weeks, I tried to get my life back together, to find a way to be independent and to work in a way that would benefit my community. However, no matter how hard I tried to rebuild, I could not erase the wounds in my heart. Every time I saw my mother, I felt like a stranger, as if there was no deeper connection between us. My mother had always been the one to hide the truth, always choosing to protect my father instead of facing the problem. But this time, I realized that no matter what I did, my mother could not change. Meetings with Olivia made me feel even more lost. She always tried to maintain a perfect image of the Miller family, but I knew clearly that everything was just a facade. While I felt suffocated by what I was going through, Olivia chose to avoid the truth, trying to ease all the tension in the family without facing the reality. In fact, Olivia was living in a shadow created by my father. She didn't dare to stand up, didn't dare to break the expectations he had set for her. I could see her pain as she slowly realized that things in this family were no longer the same. She chose to follow what my father wanted, but I couldn't continue to live like that. One weekend afternoon, while I was walking near my house, I received a call from Travis. Although we hadn't talked much since I left home, his voice on the phone made me feel like there had been a big change. It seemed like he also realized that the family was falling into chaos, and my father's decisions were no longer as simple as before. "Amber, where are you?" Travis asked, his voice cracking with concern. "What are you doing?" I replied, unable to hide the surprise in my voice. "I don't know. Things aren't right. Dad's doing everything he can to keep things quiet, but I feel like something's not right," Travis said, his voice low and strained. "The company's in trouble, and I can't tell anyone about the decisions Dad's making. I need you to help me, Amber." Travis's words came as a shock to me. We had always been distant, but now he was coming to me in his time of need. I could hear the desperation in his voice, and I couldn't let him suffer this alone. "What are you talking about?" I asked, feeling uneasy. "Don't you know? Dad has changed, Amber. He's not the man we knew. His decisions affect not just the company, but the family," Travis said, his voice laced with worry. "I'm afraid he's lying to everyone, and there's nothing I can do to stop him. I need you to find out the truth. Can you help me?" Travis's voice stopped me, feeling like everything had changed in an instant. I couldn't help but think that what I had been ignoring all this time was now coming to light. My family was falling apart, and I was facing the hard truth that I had tried to avoid. But I knew I couldn't keep avoiding it. It was time to stand up and do something. A few days later, I decided to meet Richard, my father. I thought about it for a long time, but in the end, I decided that I could no longer remain silent and do nothing. I could not let everything sink into oblivion. The whole family was in trouble, and I knew that only I could bring this truth to light. At that time, I thought I would never return to my parents' house, but I was wrong. I went to the old house where I grew up, with memories that were stained by time. Everything was the same, but there seemed to be a strange emptiness in that space. Richard sat in the living room, still the powerful man I remembered, but his eyes were different. He was no longer the man I had respected. He looked at me coldly, as if nothing had changed. "What are you doing here?" Richard asked, his voice filled with doubt. "I came to talk to you," I replied, trying to keep calm. "About what?" He sat up straight, his eyes cold as he looked at me. "I know what you're doing, and I can't stand by and watch this go on," I said, feeling a surge of anger. "The company, the family, the decisions you're making, you're ruining it all." Richard was silent for a few seconds. Then he sneered. "You don't understand, Mia. This company is mine. I do what I have to do to protect my family. You will never understand that." I felt like I was being backed into a corner, but I couldn't stop. I had suffered for too long, and now it was time for me to face the truth. "You can fool everyone else, but you can't fool me anymore. I know you're corrupt, And I won't let you drag my family down to this abyss, I replied, my voice full of determination. Richard's eyes darkened, and I could feel the tension in the air. You don't know anything, he said, his voice hoarse. So tell me, what are you doing? I asked, unable to contain my anger. You are ruining your company and tearing this family apart. You can't go on like this. The conversation with my father did not last long, but it left a big mark on me. I realized that this family could not be saved if no one was willing to face the truth. It was too late, and I had only one choice: to leave everything and start over. Since I decided to leave Bentonville and not go back to my family, everything seemed to change. I began to realize that, although I had thought I would find peace with my family again, I was now facing much darker truths. I could no longer go back and be a part of the Miller family. They were no longer a place where I found protection and love, but now only fragments of an illusion. Days living in Bentonville, although I tried to live independently, the feeling of loneliness could not be erased. I not only faced the change in the family, but also had to face discoveries that I had never thought of. In fact, the days living in the Miller family blinded me, not realizing that my father had gone too far in the wrong decisions. During this time, I realized something I couldn't ignore. My father's relationships affected not only my family, but also the company and the future of many people. What my father did was not simply bad business decisions, but actions that hurt the entire community around him. After talking to Travis about the family breakup, I continued to search for more information about my father's company. One day, I received a call from Ryan, the friend I met earlier. Ryan was someone I went to high school with and someone I could always count on when I was in trouble. However, this time, his call made me feel like something was wrong. Amber, I know you're looking into the family business, but I think there's something more you need to know, Ryan said, his voice serious. I'm listening, I replied, my heart starting to worry. There are things going on that you wouldn't expect, Ryan continued. I'm not just talking about the company getting stuck with contracts it can't fulfill. What's worse is that your dad is working with some shady people on government projects. They may be doing something illegal. My heart pounded when I heard these words. The thoughts and suspicions I had had now seemed to come true. What I was facing was not just a troubled company, but a much larger conspiracy. This made me unable to sit still any longer. I knew I had to find the truth, and I could not let my family continue like this. Are you sure, Ryan? I asked, unable to hide the worry in my voice. You're saying my dad is working with shady people on government contracts? Certainly, Ryan replied, his voice cautious. There have been suspicions of shady dealings between your father and some of the subcontracting companies. They are doing work that they can't do, and the money is disappearing without a trace. I felt like a storm was coming. I honestly couldn't believe that my family would be caught up in such a scandal. Everything I knew, everything I held dear, was crumbling before my eyes. After my conversation with Ryan, I felt like I couldn't ignore it anymore. I had heard a lot about my father and the company, but the information Ryan provided completely changed my perspective. I couldn't accept the silence anymore. I needed to find out the truth and bring it all to light. I decided to go see Eleanor once again. She is the only person I can trust in this family, who has always been there for me in the most difficult times. She understands my family situation and can help me find a way to face the truth. When you talk about your father's company being in trouble, you can't imagine how serious it is, Eleanor said, her voice filled with concern. Richard is losing everything, and you have to be ready to face that. But I can't stand by and watch them destroy everything. I can't continue to live in a family where everything is built on lies, I replied, my voice more determined than ever. I will do whatever it takes to bring the truth out into the light. Eleanor looked at me for a long moment. Then she said softly, but with poignancy. You will face difficult decisions, Mia, but you cannot let silence continue to rule your life. The next day, I sought to gain more detailed information about the shady dealings Ryan had mentioned. I searched the company records, and what I found shocked me. The contracts of Miller Construction, not just ordinary projects, but military projects and state contracts that the company did not have the capacity to carry out. In fact, these contracts were signed at prices much lower than their actual value, causing the company to suffer heavy losses. Not only did I find mismanagement of finances, but there were also signs of money laundering and illegal funds that my father and his partners had siphoned off from these projects. When I saw these financial reports, I couldn't believe my eyes. I knew that I couldn't let this continue. My whole family was caught up in a game that no one could escape. While I was thinking about the information I had just discovered, I received a call from Travis. His voice sounded desperate, and I could feel the tension in every word. "Mia, you have to do something. This can't go on. Our dad is destroying the company, and now we're dragged into this," Travis said, his voice shaking. "We can't keep living this lie. You have to do something to stop it." I could hear the weariness in his voice, and I knew Travis was no longer willing to put up with his father's bad decisions. He had reached the point where he couldn't take it anymore, but I couldn't decide everything alone. I had to act, but how could I act without ruining everything? This was the moment I needed to make the most important decision of my life. Things were coming to a head, and I couldn't stand by and watch any longer. I decided to meet Richard, my father, one last time. I don't know if he's changed, but I need to know the truth and face what I've discovered. This conversation with him would be our last, and I knew, no matter what the outcome, I would not go back to living in the shadow of those lies. As I prepared to face my father, I realized that this family, although I loved it, was also the one that had hurt me deeply. Unable to continue living in a lie, I decided to end it all and stand up for myself. I decided to meet Richard. This was not an easy decision. It was like facing someone you love, but having to accept that things have changed and cannot go back to the way they were. I was no longer the little girl of the family, but now I was a grown woman, strong enough to stand up and face the truth, no matter how painful it was. I drove Miller's house without thinking about what I could do to change it. My eyes were glued to the road ahead, and every time I walked down the familiar streets of town, I felt like I was slowly losing a part of myself. Everything around me, from the beautiful houses to the quiet shops, seemed to fade away. To me, Bentonville was no longer the place I had called home. It was just an old place, a memory I could never return to. I parked in front of the house I grew up in, a house that was once filled with laughter, love, and pride. But now, that house, while still elegant on the outside, was a place that held dark secrets. It was a place where my family had built a home, but now it was a home of lies and persistence in bad decisions. As I walked in, I noticed one thing that remained constant. Richard still sitting there, in the familiar armchair. He was still the powerful man I had once respected, but now everything had changed. The light in the room was no longer warm as before, but instead was the coldness of a space that no longer contained love. Richard didn't look up when I walked in. His eyes were still fixed on the newspaper, as if nothing had changed since I left. But I knew something had changed in him, and now I had to face that change. "You're back?" he asked, his tone casual, as if I had just stepped out for a moment. There was no surprise or concern in his voice. "I came to talk," I replied, not hiding the tension in my voice. "We need to talk about what's going on, Dad." Richard's lips curled slightly, but he didn't answer right away. He continued reading his newspaper for a while, as if trying to ignore me. But I knew he had heard me clearly, and I couldn't let him ignore me any longer. "I don't understand what you're saying." His voice was calm, but I could feel his fatigue, and his patience fading. "I don't know, but I can't stand by and watch," I said, my voice growing stronger. "I can't keep living in this silence. I can't keep watching our company, our family, all falling apart because of your bad decisions. The contracts you signed, the money that disappeared, all of this can't go on." Richard finally looked up at me, his eyes cold and angry. He said nothing for a few seconds, but I could feel his anger rising. "What do you think you understand?" he asked, his tone full of sarcasm. "You think you understand this family? This company? Everything I do is for the family, for you. If you can't understand that, then you're not my daughter anymore." His words were like a slap in the face. I couldn't believe that my father, who had always been a pillar of strength in my life, could say these things. These words were not only a rejection, but also an erasure of all the sacrifices I had made over the years. "Dad, don't say that," I said, trying to stay calm. "I saw what you were doing. I can't keep looking the other way. This company, this family, everything is ruined because of your decisions. I can't continue to live in a family where everything is built on lies." Richard rose from his chair, his eyes blazing with anger. "You have no right to criticize me. You have no idea what I have sacrificed, what I have done to maintain all this," he roared, his face red with anger. I felt the anger welling up inside me. At this point, I couldn't hold it in any longer. "Then why did you let things get this far? Why can't anyone in this family stand up and face the truth? Why can't I live my life without you controlling me?" I burst into tears, and these words were like a flood breaking its banks. Richard stepped closer to me, his hands clenched. "Mia, you don't know what you're saying. You don't understand. You can't save this family, and if you keep going like this, you'll only make things worse." I looked at him, feeling pain and disappointment wash over me. This was not my father. This was not the man I had once respected. I realized that nothing could change. This family was no longer my family. It was too late, and I could not go back. "I don't need your forgiveness, Dad. I don't need to be a part of this family anymore," I said, my voice full of determination. "I won't stand by and let you continue to ruin everything. I won't let myself be dragged down again." Richard looked at me for a long moment, as if he couldn't believe what I had just said. He didn't say anything more, just turned and walked away. And as he walked out of the room, I knew that we would never be the same again. Everything had changed, and I decided not to put up with it any longer. I had to leave my family, but it was necessary so that I could live a free life, free from expectations and lies. After leaving that house, I felt light, as if I had taken off a heavy armor. Even though I had left, I couldn't help but feel a sense of loss. But one thing I knew for sure was that I had stood up for myself. The Miller family, with all its wounds and lies, was no longer a place where I could find protection, and in that moment, I realized that freedom was not a place I arrived at, but a state of mind. I left, and I'm never coming back. A few days after the confrontation with my father, I sat in my small house again. No more twinkling lights, no more sounds of my old family, just me and the emptiness. It wasn't that I wasn't happy to be free, but I felt a strange pain as everything I believed in was slowly crumbling. I still remember the feeling of returning home, when my heart was full of hope that I would find reconciliation. But in the end, all I got in return was coldness and silence. Over the following weeks, I slowly realized that nothing in my family was salvageable. It was too far gone, and I could no longer hold out hope that my father would change. As my family, once a home of warm parties, became reduced to empty evenings, endless phone calls, and strange text messages from my mother, I realized that I needed to let it all go in order to move on with my life. One day, while I was reviewing company documents for Miller Construction, a new truth began to emerge. I had ignored it all this time because I was too busy with family matters, But now that everything had fallen apart, I felt I could no longer continue to live in silence and do nothing. As I reviewed the company's financial statements, I began to notice strange things. Contracts my father had signed seemed unreasonable, expenses were being made without any reason, and large projects that the company could not afford were being hastily signed. Huge sums of money had been withdrawn from the company and transferred to anonymous accounts. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Everything seemed so well hidden, and I felt a surge of fear. This wasn't just a financial mismanagement, but a bigger scandal that I had never thought of. I found an old email in the files, a correspondence between my father and one of his shady partners, Martin Hayes, whose name I had heard but never really paid attention to. In the letter, Hayes mentioned keeping the payment secret and asked my father to provide false documents to hide illegal transactions. Part of me couldn't accept that. How could my father, someone I had respected, do these things? How could he deceive not only me but the community he had always been proud of? Immediately, I called Ryan, an old friend, and someone who has helped me a lot during my time in Bentonville. Ryan was the first to tell me about the suspicions surrounding the family business, but now I needed more information to confirm what I had just found. When I heard about the rumors surrounding your father's company, I had no idea it was this big, Ryan said, his voice dropping. What you've uncovered is more than just a simple financial mistake. This is a massive fraud, and it may even involve people in politics. Do you think my father is trying to hide something? I asked, feeling anxiety rising in my heart. Ryan was silent for a moment before answering. I'm not sure. But what I do know is that your father's company is controlled by people I don't trust, and they're doing everything they can to hide the truth. Is there anything you can do to help me? I asked, knowing I couldn't face this alone. I needed help, and Ryan was the only one I could trust right now. I will help you gather information, he replied. But we need to be careful. This is not a simple matter. After my conversation with Ryan, I couldn't help but think about my next steps. I had found out part of the truth, but I couldn't ignore what I had discovered. How could I let my father continue with his actions? How could I face my family when they were still living a lie? I made a decision. I would not stay silent any longer. I would bring the evidence I had gathered to light, not just for the company, but for my family. My family needed to know the truth, and no matter how painful it was, I could not live with this lie any longer. The next day, I went to see Eleanor, the person I always trusted, and the only person who could keep me going during this time. She was the only person who understood what I was going through, and I knew I could rely on her to make it right. I can't just stand by and watch, Eleanor, I said as we sat together. I can't let my father keep doing this. I have to face the truth. She looked at me for a moment, her face full of concern, but then she nodded slightly. You can't change what happened, Mia, but you can make things clear. Do the right thing, no matter how hard it is. She tugged at my hand, her eyes filled with love, but also determination. You have to fix this family before it destroys everything. You can't save them if they don't want to change. Finally, I decided to do something I had been thinking about for years. I would stand up and face Richard once again, and this time not to ask for forgiveness, but to face the truth. I am no longer your old daughter, and I will not allow you to continue to manipulate my life. I waited for him in the living room of the house, a place where I had once felt safe. But now it had become a place I no longer wanted to return to. When he entered, I saw not a strong father, but a man who was slowly losing everything. His eyes were tired, and his face was no longer a symbol of power. What are you doing back? Richard asked, not at all surprised. What else can you do, Mia? I found out the truth, I said, my voice calm but determined. I can't live this lie anymore. You did something unforgivable, and I can't stand by and watch this family fall apart. Richard looked at me for a moment, but said nothing. In his eyes, I saw no worry or regret, just a coldness that I could not understand. "You don't understand, Mia," he said, his voice full of contempt. "You don't understand what I do to keep this family going." I didn't want to hear any more excuses. "You don't need to understand anymore. You just need to understand that this family is no longer your place." And then, I decided to leave it all behind. Everything I had ever wanted, all the hopes and pain of this family, was over. My path would no longer involve the Miller family. After I decided to stand up to my father, and when all the family secrets were exposed, I felt like I had been liberated. The complicated relationships, the heavy expectations from my parents, and everything I had endured all this time seemed to have been exhausted. However, I couldn't deny that after all, there was still a part of me that felt empty. How could I completely let go of everything? How could I turn my back on my family, on the people I loved the most, no matter how much they had hurt me? That feeling is always present on the nights I sit alone in my small house, listening to the ticking of the clock. A feeling that cannot be named, both light and heavy. I have found freedom in my determination to leave, but I cannot avoid the moments when I feel confused and lonely. Sometimes I wonder, was I right in deciding to leave everything? Perhaps the answer will forever remain unanswered. Day by day, I continued to walk, one step at a time, without looking back. Every morning when I woke up, I tried to find a new reason to continue living, to continue to be resilient in facing the new challenges that life brought. Even though I left my family behind, my life still cannot be without the remnants of those years. Especially when I saw the wounds they left on me, wounds that I thought I would never heal. After deciding not to return to my family, I began to search for a new purpose. The days in Bentonville with quiet mornings, meetings with old friends, sitting with memories that seemed to have fallen asleep, all made me realize one thing. I have to continue this journey, no matter how hard and lonely it is. My purpose now is not to seek recognition from family or society, but to find myself again. I remember a saying that Eleanor once said to me, "You can't save others, Mia. You can only save yourself." It was a simple sentence, but it had a huge power for me, and that was the reason I decided not to go back to my family. I used to want them to understand and accept me, but now I realize that what I need most is acceptance from myself. However, no matter how hard I tried, a part of me couldn't forget my family. And then, one day, while I was standing in the grocery store near my house, I happened to see Olivia standing in front of the vegetable counter, her eyes passing over me, but then stopped when she recognized me. "Amber?" Olivia asked, her voice surprised and soft. "Olivia?" I replied, trying to keep calm despite my pounding heart. She smiled, but I could tell she was uncomfortable. We stood there for a moment, silently looking at each other. After a few seconds, Olivia spoke up. "You're really here? It's been a while since we last saw each other, right?" I don't know," I replied, feeling like an invisible distance was separating us. "Just got back today." Olivia looked at me with a worried expression. "I can't believe you're back. How are things with your family?" Her words came as a shock to me. I had thought that Olivia would not say anything about her family, but now she spoke. I was silent for a moment, then replied, "I don't know, Olivia. Things have changed so much. My family is not the same anymore." Olivia bowed her head, not daring to look at me. She didn't seem to want to say more, but I could feel the pain in her every movement. "I know things have been hard for your family. I didn't think it would be like this," Olivia said, her voice breaking. "Olivia, what's going on with my father?" I asked, unable to contain my curiosity and concern. "Do you know what he's doing?" She looked at me, her eyes no longer confident as before. "Your father, he has changed. Things are not the same anymore. I don't know the details, but I think you should know that not everyone in our family is okay." Hearing Olivia's words, I felt the truth slowly dawning on me. What I had overlooked, what I had not wanted to see, was now bursting forth within me. Even though I had tried not to let myself get caught up in it, I realized that my family was beyond saving. They were too far gone, and I was ready to let go. After my conversation with Olivia, I couldn't wait any longer. I decided that I had to do something about the secrets my family had kept hidden. I couldn't stand by and watch as things fell apart. I had to face the truth, not just for myself, but for the others who were also suffering from my father's actions. I decided to go see Ryan again. I needed his help to gather evidence and prepare for the next steps. We talked all evening, discussing what needed to be done. I couldn't do this alone, and Ryan was the only one I could trust right now. "Amber, we have to do this now," Ryan said, his voice serious. "Your father's company will affect more than just your family. It will affect the entire community, and we have to stand up. Otherwise, everything will be in darkness forever." I nodded, feeling determination rising inside me. "I know, and I will do whatever it takes to get the truth out. I can't live a lie anymore." Ultimately, I realized that the decision I had made was not just about my family, but about me. Family can be a source of love and protection, but when it becomes a place of lies and manipulation, I cannot continue to live in it. With the evidence in hand and a strong determination, I decided to do what I never thought I could do. I would confront my father again, but this time, I would not stop until the truth was fully revealed. This would be the final step in my journey, the step to freedom and liberation. I have realized that to move forward in life, sometimes you have to let go of everything you once had, whether it is family or close relationships, because only when you are truly standing on your own 2 feet can you start to rebuild from scratch. As I look back on the journey I have taken, I cannot help but feel a strange sense of calm. The days of tension, the confrontations, and all the struggles I had to endure to leave my family, it was all over. But this ending was not a resignation, but a release. I was standing between 2 paths, between the past and the future, between the family I had wanted to keep, and the new life I had decided to embark on. And although the road ahead was challenging, I knew I had no choice but to keep going. After gathering important evidence and deciding not to let things continue in the dark, I not only exposed family secrets, but also faced myself. What I did was not only to destroy lies, but also to rebuild my life from the broken pieces of the past. That day, when I decided to let go of my family, was not the end of a chapter in my life, but the beginning of a new one. I did what needed to be done. I faced my father, faced the truth that I had been avoiding for so many years. And finally, I kept the promise I made to myself. I was no longer the miller's daughter. After that last meeting with my father, I felt as if heavy armor had been removed. I left, but not with regret, but with a strange calm. In the end, I had chosen myself, and that was the most important thing. The following weeks were spent thinking about what I had done. I kept returning to thoughts of my family, of my parents, of the relationships I had once had. But everything had changed, and I couldn't go back. At first, the loneliness seemed overwhelming. I had lived my life in the shadow of my family for so long, and now I had to stand on my own. Every day I felt an emptiness, as if a part of me had been lost forever. But then I realized that it was not a loss, but a freedom. I no longer had to live up to my father's expectations, no longer had to please people who didn't understand me. I could do what I wanted, walk the path I chose. Although it may have been confusing at first, gradually I began to feel a comfort I had never felt before. Every morning I wake up, I tell myself that this is a new day, a day I can start over, and I am no longer afraid. To escape the Miller family's grip, I must shake off everything that has held me back before and bravely step into a life without any constraints. One fine morning, I decided to go to a newly opened coffee shop in town. It was small but cozy, a place where I could relax and think about the next steps in my life. I sat down at a table, looked out the window, and saw white clouds drifting gently across the sky. This was the feeling I had been looking for all along. A feeling of freedom, a feeling of no longer being trapped in the past. We often think of freedom as something grand and difficult to achieve, but in fact, freedom starts with small choices in life. And I finally was able to freely choose my own path. But leaving my family doesn't mean I don't have to face challenges in life. I face an uncertain future, but I'm not afraid. I've chosen to do something bigger, something that's not just for myself, but for the people I love and the people I can help. I started to get involved in community activities, volunteering at an organization that supports veterans. I felt a change in myself, as I lived not only for myself, but also for others. The stories of veterans made me realize that I was not the only one facing loss and pain. Everyone has their own story, and we can overcome any challenge if we share and help each other. Gradually, I began to reconnect with old friends, people I had missed during my time at the Millers. They were always there for me, always supporting me. And when I saw them, I realized that I didn't have to be alone. The story of family, as painful as it is not everything. There are other relationships, friends that I can call family, and they are my greatest source of support. I started writing about my journey, the decisions I had to make, and the changes I had to go through. I wanted to not only share my story with others, but also remind myself that no matter what life throws at me, I am strong enough to get through it. When the fall came, I decided to enroll in a career development program. I no longer had to rely on my family or anyone else to define my worth. I decided my own path and was not afraid of failure. I understood that every challenge was an opportunity to learn and grow. A month later, I started taking project management courses and looking for opportunities in the industry I had always loved. I no longer felt limited by my family or my past. I had found my purpose, and that was to help those in need. Life is never easy, and I can't change the past. But I've learned that in order to move forward, I have to accept what happened and not let the past dictate my future. I don't look back anymore, because I know I'm on the right path. After all that I have been through, I have realized that freedom is not a destination, but a journey. And in that journey, I have not only found myself, but also found a larger world where I can make changes and inspire those around me. I have come a long way, faced challenges, and overcome pain to finally stand on my own 2 feet. And although there are many difficulties ahead, I believe that I will continue to move forward because I have learned an important lesson. Nothing is impossible when you are determined to stand up and be true to yourself. If you feel lost, never stop looking. Freedom and happiness come when you dare to face the truth and dare to change your life.